Welcome into another edition of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we have a ton to discuss. Alabama football has an off week, so we are transitioning into what I'm probably known for best, and that's Alabama basketball. I am super excited to have a guest today, so don't want to waste too much time, but want to do a couple of quick things here up at the top. If you are new here, if you consider subscribing to the channel, I really would appreciate it. Additionally, if you have not seen, I'll have it posted down below scrolling, but barnesonbama.com is where I'm going to have all of my written content. I've done some pregame threads some pregame and postgame write-ups for our exhibitions, and me and Jordan will talk about some of those exhibitions here in a second. But if you're interested, all the pregame threads are going to be posted on my Twitter as always. But then if you're interested, they're going to be posted here as well. Like I said, that's just where I just want to post everything instead of on Substack. It's just easier to have everything all in one place. So that's what we have new this season. We're doing the website. Additionally, like I said, we're going to have pregame and post-game breakdowns of all Alabama basketball games. And last but certainly not least, we are sponsored by the Believe Podcast Networks. If you hear any ads on Apple or Spotify, anything you could do to help out those sponsors, we would really appreciate. But without any further ado, I have a guest that anybody who's been around the channel for a little while has seen before. But we have Mr. Jordan Harper joining us today. Jordan was former basketball analyst with Rivals, the Tide Illustrated, the Rivals Network. He currently is the high school basketball coach for Brooks. He also hosts another Alabama basketball podcast that I'm sure many of you are well aware of called the Double Dribble Podcast. And I'm excited to welcome Jordan to the show. How you doing today, Jordan?
Good, Owen. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. I'm excited for what I've seen out of Alabama basketball so far. I think that the exhibitions, the first one scared me a little bit. I will admit, the lack of defense, and I know that the defense this year is going to be a problem, but the absolute lack of defense definitely scared me to some extreme, or I wouldn't say extreme, but to some bit. But I think that Furman game kind of was exactly what I needed to see and wanted to see out of Alabama. Save for that first 9-0 stretch that Furman had us on. I think that was what I wanted to see. So I think I'm doing decently well, but excited for the first game tip off. Just excited to get the season underway.
Yeah, don't really know how to take scrimmages or what takeaways to take from scrimmages outside of finally getting to see the guys play against other people besides themselves. I know the coaches and the players enjoy that, and fans obviously will eat up any kind of basketball action, whether it counts or not. But you've heard a lot of good things about this team, whether it be from Nate Oates or people around the program in the offseason saying it's probably the best shooting team that Nate Oates has had at Alabama, which they've had some really good ones the past 7 or so years. But the Florida State game felt like a glorified scrimmage. It was basically what it was anyways. Great calls down in Ballin and Boutwell, had a great crowd, seemed like. But the amount of free throws, having 88 or 90 free throws, however it was just, it's not going to go that way in the regular season. I don't know why the refs, they did the same thing in Auburn and Oklahoma State as well. If you watch that game, it was just a ton of free throws, ton of fouls called. But Florida State, give them credit. McCray had a great game, and Alabama battled. They took every punch Florida State could give, and that the backcourt is just LeBaron Philon and Aiden Holloway saying we're not going to lose this game. Combined for 48 of the 109 they scored. So you really like to see that. You saw a good game from Taylor Bowen in his first bit of action. Houston Millette getting him rocking and rolling again. Looks like he's going to have a big role while Jalil Bethea is out. So you got to see a lot of guys. Keaton Bristow is another one in that game that people were excited to see, and he delivered as well. But yeah, the Furman game seemed like more of a regular season college basketball game probably would. It was a game that had normal ebbs and flows. You had had Furman come out hot to start the game at home, which you would expect to see, and then Alabama took heavy punches from them early and then pulled away late big time to win by 25 or so. Again, led by LeBaron Philon and Aiden Holloway, which I think is going to be it's a common theme this year, which we'll probably touch on the front court soon on this episode, I'd imagine. But the backcourt's going to really have to carry this team just due to their depth and overall talent. But yeah, it's great to see Alabama basketball play again, and looking forward to Monday night. We're taking our basketball team down there. Should be a good time. Thankfully, Trace and Eagle staff will not be in attendance that game.
100% agree. Yeah. And, for those of you unaware, because I actually haven't announced it, but unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to attend that first game. I was planning on attending. My fiance has a job interview in Nashville earlier that day. And so I have a friend of mine that wasn't going to be able to attend. And I asked him at our small group last night if he wanted my ticket. So somebody will be using my ticket, but I'll be watching from afar for this first one. I will definitely be in attendance for that Purdue game the next week. But, I think that when I look at that exhibition, I feel like you can take away some things, but not everything as normal, right? I think that if I'm going to take away something from the exhibitions, I can take away the fact that Trelly looks healthy. I think that what we saw out of him in that Furman exhibition, I thought was exactly what you wanted to see out of him. Yes, you still had him on a bit of a minutes restriction. He only played 16 minutes or something, but he looked really good in the minutes that he had. He was very attacking. He did not seem like he was favoring his Achilles or anything. He wasn't letting it, have him shy away from contact. Like, he seemed very comfortable. His dribble seemed, in sync. He only made one shot, but I'm not worried about that. Trelly's a great shooter. I'm not terribly concerned. It's more of just kind of the standpoint of, or 1-3, I guess. But I think that's one thing that I could take away a little bit. And then I think the other thing that I've taken away, and kind of my biggest takeaway from these two games, is that Davion Hannah and Amari Allen, if they are anything like what we saw in the two exhibitions, they were vastly underranked, and they're going to have a fairly substantial impact this season. And I say that because for me, they're two guys that, we talk about freshman rebounders being one of the big problems. I'm not going to say Florida State and Furman are elite rebounding teams by any stretch, but Amari Allen was one rebound away from a double-double in 13 or 15 minutes or whatever in the Furman game. They combined for 14 rebounds in the first game. They both showed really, really good bouts of athleticism. Like, Davion Hannah has the tomahawk dunk attempt in the first game, has the really good pinned block in the second. I thought that Amari Allen's defense on the ball was pretty good. Davion Hannah's been the guy that Nate Oates talks the most about from defense. You know what I'm saying? Everything just really feels like those guys, not to say that London Jemison has been bad, but I think that coming out of this recruiting class, if we're going to, kind of sit Collins to the side, because I would consider those other three just kind of a different situation. I think everybody was really talking about London Jemison, at least from a rankings perspective, and Amari Allen and Davion Hannah were the ones kind of left by the wayside. And honestly, the play on the court, at least through the first two exhibitions, seems to be kind of the opposite of that. And I think that's what's personally kind of shocked me, and I'd be curious if that kind of continues throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, the freshmen are always the ones that you're the most drawn to, especially in scrimmages. Football, basketball, it doesn't matter what sport it is. It's the new guys. It's the guys that you've been waiting to see in live action. Taylor Boboan, we've seen in live action, except at Florida State and Bethea at Miami. We know how they play, but we have no idea how some of these 17, 18-year-old kids are going to transition to the college game. And yeah, I agree on your point. Davion and Amari were less talked about than London. London may even be the better pro prospect, if you want to call it that, based on his game, his size, and everything. But yeah, Davion and Amari's shown that they're going to fight for minutes this year. And Nate said it. Nate seems to say it every year. They have a depth problem, but it's a good problem. They have so much depth that he's got to distribute minutes properly. And it's when it gets to conference time, you kind of have to cut those down to, an 8-9 man rotation. But non-conference, you can keep it, 10, 11, 12 guys, play as many as you want to just kind of see how they, play and react. But yeah, Davion and Amari both showed great flashes. Davion being more of the defensive guy, and Amari being more of the rebound slasher guy that goes and gets a bucket at the rim. But both bring great intangibles, being 6'6" and 6'8" respectively. And, him along with the transfer Keaton Bristow, I mean, there's a lot of good new players that's going to take a little bit for them to build chemistry. overall, which they don't have much time to do because of this brutal non-conference. Thanks, Nate. But he really wants to see how his team stacks up against the best of the best, and I respect him for it. But yeah, adding those guys and then getting Trelly back healthy, and looks like Houston's healthy, and that's really why it's hard to judge scrimmages, because he's just throwing guys out there. You're going to see lineups that you're not going to see in the regular season. He's just tinkering with it, playing with it, and seeing what happens and see what works, who plays well with who, and it's fun to see that as a fan. I mean, you win or lose a scrimmage, who cares? But you really learn a lot about who plays well with who and what role they should end up playing when it comes to regular season. So yeah, freshmen are really excited. I'm really excited to see them kind of grow throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think that you're absolutely right, and that's something I tried to tell people, on the show or in my writings or anything is Nate Oates is kind of notorious for just throwing random lineups out there, worrying way more about like, hey, I want to get everybody playing time more than who's on the floor even, right? Like it's like, oh, you haven't had enough playing time. Let's get you out there. And like, it's not even a lineup that makes any sense. I don't remember seeing too many of those, and I think that just more speaks to the offensive talent on this team. I think that there's a lot of lineups from an offensive perspective that could kind of work. I don't think that we're going to be quite as limited from that standpoint as you have been in years past, where you have certain players that just can't be on the floor together because their offensive talents just don't match up at all. We saw that at times with like even Mo Diabate and Cliff, right? Like we very rarely would play the two of them together because of the lack of shooting, and we just didn't feel comfortable having them out there together. I don't think you're going to have too many of those lineups this season where Nate just truly doesn't feel comfortable having two guys on the floor at the same time. I'm sure some will emerge, and there will be some reason why you don't want exact guys on the floor, of course. But I just don't see quite as many of those, jumping off the page at me this, at least early this season. Really quick, I know what I wanted to, partially bring you on today for was to talk about, you kind of referenced Nate's non-conference schedule, and I'm going to pop it up here on the screen really quick for anybody who may have missed it. But the non-conference schedule that we have coming up, we've got North Dakota, as we've kind of already alluded to. We'll talk about it here in a minute. And then on Saturday, before the LSU game in football, we have the St. John's game in Madison Square Garden. That was a 12 noon Eastern tip. Then you got Purdue at home with the number one team in the country coming to Coleman. Illinois in Chicago, I believe. Then Gonzaga, UNLV, and kind of a mystery team for the players there out in Vegas. You got Clemson at home for ACC, SEC. UTSA and Austin Claunch coming to town on the 7th. Arizona and Birmingham. South Florida at home with Brian Hodgson coming to town. Kennesaw State and Petway up in Huntsville. And then Yale coming to town on the 29th. I think that the thing that kind of worries me about this schedule is, and I think it's the thing that worries most people about the schedule is you have one game to kind of tune up your roster and decide what kind of is going to work the best before you get into 4 games in a row at a minimum that are going to be, pretty stressful. And, you need to know your lineups, and it's going to be a pretty skinny rotation. And, what is kind of your thoughts on what Nate's going to have to do to make that work? Because I think that, in years past, we at least had 2 or 3 games, and sometimes those first games were kind of a dud, right? Like we've had times where you went up against Hodgson or somebody and you don't have quite as good a game as you would hope you had. Right now, part of that's your assistant that knows you really well, but you at least had some extra time to tune up. This season, you have one, quite frankly, really bad team that you may not learn a lot from because of, like you said, no Trace and Eagle staff. For anybody curious about the KenPom rankings, they are currently 314. Now, I know that's preseason, but, take it with a grain of salt. They're still 314, which is by far the worst on the schedule. So what's kind of your thoughts on the start of this schedule?
Yeah, you don't have much time at all, like you mentioned. Sorry if you hear my kids in the background, but it's not it's not for the weak of heart, for sure, or the faint of heart. Yeah, you get one tune-up game pretty much. You're not going to learn a whole lot from your team. It should be a game where they could probably put up 100 or probably name the score, honestly. But you're going to have, traveling to New York, facing Patino, who has given Nate Oates problems when they've played while he's at Alabama. I mean, he took team in the NCAA tournament, really good Alabama team and took them to the wire, it seemed like, before Javon Quinterly took over late in that game. But he's always tough. They've got a lot of dogs up there, a lot of returning starters from last year. And then we talked off camera about Purdue and their front court matching up against Alabama's, and talking about those weird lineups. It's potential that you could see a lineup. Noah Williamson was one that we did not reference in terms of new players, playing in the Furman game. I thought he played really well, surprised me from the things that I've read about him and seen in person. I got to see him practice once or twice in the summer and once in the fall. But, you might see a lineup where Bol Bowen's playing the 3 and then Williamson the 4 and Sherrell the 5, just to match up size in the front court with some of those guys. And that's not far-fetched. I mean, it might sound like it, but it's not. I mean, Nate does have the guys that he can really move to different positions, because Bol Bowen is a true, 3 to 5 hybrid player that, if you want to go big, he can play the 3, he can handle the ball well enough, bring it up the court, whatnot. And then you got a lineup to where you can really go small and have Bol Bowen at the 5. So you might see some bigger lineups against teams like Florida or, Purdue for sure. If they ever ran into a UConn or someone that has a really good big front court. So that's really going to test this team. And Nate Oates is, how do they match up against certain teams that cause a disadvantage for Alabama? I don't think many teams, if any, are going to match up and give our backcourt problems in terms of defending, outscoring them, whatnot. I mean, Alabama's got probably a top 5 backcourt in the country, but front court is definitely the weakness on the team, especially the depth, because they really only have 3 true front court guys in Williamson, Bol Bowen, and Sherrell. Collins, whatever he turns out to be, if he gives you minutes, great. I mean, he's a big body. He can probably bang around down in the paint, get some rebounds, or if use all 5 fouls if you need to. But this non-conference is really going to test this team, and they've got to grow chemistry quick. They don't have much time to do so. And then you can hop right into conference play. There's really no room for breathers outside of that first game.
Yeah, and kind of your point about Purdue, and it's something that I think that fans should be aware of. Obviously, those that have followed the team for a while will understand this, but Nate's going to do some things with the roster in that Purdue game, whether it be going super big or super small, that I think fans are going to be shaking their head at and very confused by, because I could see Nate trying to, especially if it's in Coleman and the team starts out shooting hot, him putting some small guys out there and basically making Oscar Clough and Trey Kaufman-Renn run. Just try to put 85 possessions on the floor, right? Like just crank up the pace.
He does not care about is what the fans think on how he constructs his lineups. He's going to do, he's going to think outside the box. That's something he's always done.
Yeah, I mean, he's gonna, I could see a world where he does exactly what you're talking about. He goes super big. He tries to match them from what would make more sense, because Trey Kaufman-Renn being the 4 and Oscar Clough being the 5 is going to be a mismatch for most people in the country, and Alabama's no exception. And I think that, I think you could see the big lineup, but I think you could see, I'm telling you, like, don't be shocked if Alabama comes out that game and runs like 4 guards and, Taylor Bol Bowen at the 5, or, Keaton Bristow at the 5, and literally just tries to crank the pace up to an untenable level for Purdue and sees what happens, right? Because there are things that you can do at that level. Now, are you going to struggle in the paint? Absolutely. But there's a world where you struggle in the paint, even with Aiden Sherrell and Noah Williamson, right? Like, that world exists, because as we kind of talked, you mentioned it, we kind of talked about it before we got going. Alabama had a good backcourt last season, or a good front court last season. Not elite, but like a very good one. And Cliff and Grant got absolutely bullied by Kaufman Wren last season. So, like, this is a standpoint of even what I would consider a better Alabama backcourt, or sorry, front court. They still were able to have a lot of success against us. So I would be very curious. I'm very curious about that Purdue game. It's kind of the one that's got me perking my ears up or eyes up the most. I wonder what we're gonna do, because it's the game that doesn't have any obvious, this is how Nate's going to attack them, right? When I look at the Gonzaga or Illinois games, I feel like Nate, if you've seen this team, any number of years, you kind of know what Nate's going to do. But that Purdue one, in my mind, presents a certain challenge that I don't think we've had with the current roster construction, because I think the roster construction we have today is unlike what we've had in years past, with the versatility of guys like Keaton Bristow and Taylor Bowen, but also the versatility of guys like Aiden Terrell and Noah Williamson, right? Like, you could put the two of those guys on a floor. They shoot well enough that it wouldn't hurt you to have both of them on the floor at the same time. I think that the offense would still work. Would be a slower pace, sure, but I don't think that that's potentially as big of an issue as it might be. I'm very curious to see what happens in that game.
Yeah, for sure. And like Keaton Bristow's a guy that I forgot to mention in the front court. So you've really got five guys that you can decently count on to be in that front court. So it's gonna be thin. I don't think the St. John's game is really going to tell much about this team in terms of how legit of a contender are they to go deep in March. And I know it's November. It's going to be mid-November. You're not going to know. Nobody knew Florida was going to win the championship last year in November. Okay? I'm not saying Alabama's going to contend for a national championship, but I do think this team has the makeup to where if they click late in the year, that they can make another Elite Eight late second weekend, maybe even a Final Four run, depending on how the tournament shapes out. But I think the Purdue game is really going to show, where they're at, because you've already played North Dakota, you've played St. John's, and you're going to have a little bit more chemistry going into that game. It's at home. It's against the number one team. It's going to be a raucous crowd. You're going to have a lot of energy. How do they stack up against what's deemed the best of the best at home in your, have all the energy towards you? How do they perform? If they come out and lose by 5 or 10, like, is that a moral victory? Nate's not going to say it is, regardless. But if they come out and win, it's definitely going to show a lot more than if they lost a close game, because you want to see that winning DNA in this team early on. And what better team to do it against than the number one team and deemed the best? They have the best odds to win the national championship. They probably deserve it with what they have coming back. And Matt Painter is coach and just made the national championship game just a couple of years ago. So it's going to be a huge test for them, and I think that game's going to show early on what this team's made of.
I 1,000,000% agree, and that's why, not to belabor the point about Purdue, but it's the reason why I think that is kind of my barometer game as well. Is it's just to me, that game being at home, Alabama has performed pretty well at home. With Alabama being a team that does, rely on the three, obviously, we can talk till we're blue in the face that, Nate wants the defense to be at a level that the threes determine how much you win by, not if you win. But, at the end of the day, if you shoot 2 for 25 or something, you're probably not going to do well. And, thankfully at home, save for a handful of Kentucky games through the years, you've generally shot the ball reasonably well. And, so I think that's also kind of the reason why I, circled that game. Is it's the game where it feels like you're going to have a true realization of, is this team's offense legitimate against one of the best? Is this team's defense legitimate against one of the best? And like I said, I think that Purdue, like you mentioned Florida, I think Purdue is a good barometer for a team like Florida, because Florida is probably the other team that you're going to have on the schedule that's going to trot out a front court that can do to you what Purdue's going to do to you. I was in attendance at the SEC tournament last year, and Florida's the reason why Florida won the national championship. People are going to talk about Walter Clayton, and for good reason, but that front court's insane. Like Alex Condon, Thomas
Mhm.
Houck, Chinyelu, like that is an insane front court, and they're back. So, I don't suspect they're going to be getting any worse. They're going to, that's a team that has given Alabama troubles. And I think that, you're going to learn a little bit about this team and what kind of resolve they have because, on paper, at least, they don't seem like they stack up quite as well as some teams in years past, right? Like you don't have a true 1-to-1 like you had in some years past.
Mhm.
The other one I wanted to talk about is Gonzaga, and the reason I wanted to mention them is I don't know if everybody saw, but Ty and Grant Foster, previously of Grand Canyon, was previously denied eligibility, but has since had a court say he's now eligible to play. So it looks like that MTE that we're going to be playing for the Players Era is going to be against Mark Few and Gonzaga. Do you think this is another, Alabama Gonzaga classic matchup? Obviously, the first two in Seattle and Birmingham were really, really good games. Do you think this is another one that's going to kind of be, Nate Oates and Mark Few battling it out down the stretch?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially on the style of play both coaches like to play. They like to get out and go. Nate or Mark Hughes a little bit more methodical than Nate Oates. When I say that, I mean Nate Oates is hair on fire going up and down the court. They want shots in the first 10 seconds. Mark wants it if it's there. If not, they want to back it out and they play ball. But yeah, when you got a guy like Ty and Grant Foster that's been there and done that, guy that was really successful at Grand Canyon, and then you got Graham Ike and Braden Huff there. I mean, they're guys that they're probably one of Mark Few's more experienced teams at the top. And you add a guy like Time. I mean, that's a guy that they really wanted to get the eligibility right because he's a key part to whether not only if they win the WCC, but if they want to go far in the tournament, which they've struggled at of late. They've struggled at getting deep into the tournament. They haven't had as strong of teams, but he could be a key to doing that. And against Alabama, I mean you saw the games in Birmingham where it's just outscoring each other. And especially when they went to Seattle, it's just who's going to score the most points. And, I don't see that being any different now, especially being at the Players Era. It's going to be, I'm interested to see the environment for those games. Just kind of, obviously it's first for everybody to see it, but having two prominent programs the last, 5, 8, Gonzaga a lot longer, but to have those two teams, those two coaches going in that environment and that tournament setting, it's going to be really, really cool to see.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think that it's going to be a really, really good MTE. We'll be curious to see who Alabama potentially faces for that third game. I do think that UNLV, as much as some people were sad when you see UNLV as like your second game in the Players Era. Like Alabama's got enough heavy hitters at the front part of our schedule. I don't mind seeing a team like UNLV on the schedule. Not to say that they're a bad team, but they're definitely lower, going to be lower ranked than a lot of the other people at that tournament. And I think that, for how insanely difficult Nate's schedule is already going to be, I think that it's honestly kind of a breath of fresh air to have somebody like that already
Mm-hmm.
locked and loaded on the schedule. At least that's my opinion of it. I think that, if you didn't have it, I mean, you're talking St. John's, Purdue, Illinois, Gonzaga. If it's not UNLV, then obviously I think that whoever would be after UNLV is going to be another highly ranked team. And then Clemson, you're talking, 5, 6, top 30, top 40 teams in a row. And like, can you do it? Sure. Nate would kind of point to that's what you're going to have to do in March Madness. And sure. But I do think that that's just an absolutely gauntlet of a run and not exactly what you potentially want to have to go through. Because in my mind, everybody talks about compounding wins, but you also can unfortunately start compounding losses with stuff like that. And we saw that a couple of years ago where Alabama had a really, really tough run and unfortunately just dropped game after game after game. And, Alabama was able to survive it, continually, have a good season. But I think it is something that definitely hurt the overall demeanor of the team for kind of the beginning part of conference play. And that's what I kind of wanted to get to, now, and not to, brush over the people at the end of the schedule, because I think that, being able to play a bunch of former assistants, I think is always a good thing. You're helping out both programs with stuff like that. So I think that that's a great thing to do. But what's kind of your overall thoughts on what a realistic goal for Alabama could be for, I've been on record saying I think that it's like 8-5, 8-5 to 10-3 is kind of what our realistic expectations should be, like somewhere in that realm. But what's kind of Jordan Harper's, this is, if you had to ask me today, in October, what the non-conference goal heading into conference play would be, what are you thinking?
Yeah, obviously you can't drop any of the North Dakota, UNLV, Clemson, South Florida, Kennesaw, Yale. That's what, 6 games right there, and then you're talking about a bunch of UTSA. I mean, you got a bunch of those games, but you also have games where you could definitely lose all the rest. I mean, it's just that's how tough of a schedule it is. I had us with Alabama with 10 wins in the non-con, just because I really feel like they'll win a couple of these toss-up games. Alabama against Arizona, I think they match up really well with the Wildcats. Gonzaga, I think Alabama still, even with Jalil Bethea for that game, I think he would have been huge in that game. He'd have played probably would have had a really good game if he got to play against Gonzaga. I think Alabama will probably win that one. One that I have absolutely no idea about is the Illinois game in Chicago. I really don't know where to lean on that. I'd imagine the spread's probably going to be 2.5, 3 points towards Illinois, just because they're playing in Chicago. But overall, I don't have a good feeling about Purdue for St. John's, but everyone else, I really feel like Alabama's going to win those games, or should win those games if I had to pick. So I would say probably about 10 wins is a reasonable 9 to 10 wins is a reasonable expectation for this team. Could they win 7 or 8? Absolutely. Would that change my opinion on this team? No, just because that's how tough of a schedule it is. Now, obviously, if they lose to Kennesaw or to Yale, or lose a couple of those games, might start hitting the panic button a little bit, because that's probably going to be a 5-win, 6-win non-conference stretch. But overall, I think probably 9 to 10 wins is probably a reasonable expectation.
Yeah, and kind of your point's like a great example. It's inherently a loss to a team like Kennesaw or something like wouldn't be the end of the world. The reason it becomes a major problem is there's no other easy games to get your wins from, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing if you have a schedule like, some other teams in the conference where there's one good team on the schedule. It's like if you drop another, so-so game, it's okay because you're still going to get 10, 11 wins sleepwalking through that schedule. I mean, Alabama realistically, even if they only beat the teams inside or outside of the top 100 in KenPom, they have 6 wins on the schedule. They have 6 teams in the current non-conference. Now, obviously, that's without knowing who the final game in the Players Era is. But my gut says they're going to be inside of the top 100, given the fact that UNLV is at 107. But they have currently 6 games outside of the top 100. So, those, and at 107, that's not even a bad loss. I mean, 107 is not even considered a terrible loss. It's not great, but it's not a quad 4 loss, quad 3 loss. It's probably a quad 2 loss on a neutral floor. So it's kind of a standpoint where a lot of people look at oh, Alabama's going to need to do this or that. And I'm with you. I'm of the mindset that, like I said, I say between 8 and 10 is kind of in my mind, what the realistic expectations are. I think if you get below that, you start having at least a few questions. Obviously above that, you're absolutely thrilled. But I think also, even if it's an 8-loss team or 8-win team and you have 5 losses, I think it's also kind of a standpoint of how did Alabama look in those games? Because it's one thing to lose a game and it's another thing to be not competitive in a game. And I don't think that we will have any games where Alabama is truly just uncompetitive. But I think that that's one of the ones that you kind of have to circle is, if there becomes a situation like the Purdue game, right? Like, let's use that one as a great example. If Purdue comes in here and they have issues with Alabama has issues with their front court, like we suspect that they might, and Purdue just absolutely runs house on us. Like, is that going to completely worry me? I mean, yes, because I'm kind of worried about it now, right? But I don't think that that's going to overall change my expectations on the team because I think currently in my mind and maybe in yours, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I consider that in the realm of possibility currently, right? Like there is a world in which Alabama does not look very good against Purdue because we just can't handle their front court. Like I'm kind of preparing myself for that real possibility.
Yeah, you can't box score watch games. Like if you would have box score watched, Purdue and Alabama last year, you would have thought, Purdue ran ragged on Alabama, but it was a very competitive game, close, and then Purdue just hit some shots at the end to kind of extend the score, and it looks like a bigger win than what it was. So yeah, seeing how they play in some of these toss up games is going to be huge. If they blow out some of these teams, like I think they could 100% blow out teams like Arizona or Illinois. They showed it against Illinois last year. So they certainly have the potential to, but they also have a potential to struggle against North Dakota like they did last year. So it's, and everybody knows that Eagle staff went off against Alabama. That's why it was close. Things happen. Weird things happen early in the season in games like that. So, it is game to game how they look. You can't judge it by the score or anything like that. So, yeah, I don't think any team's going to, run Alabama out of the building. But I do think Alabama will run other teams out of the building. So that's why I feel really good about this team going into the year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we definitely have a possibility, and I don't think anybody's going to be quite dumb enough to pull like a BYU from last season and just run zone the whole game. But like, you will run into a situation where Alabama at least scares the 3-point number, right? Like the record 3-point for the season. I think that when NATO says this is one of the best shooting teams, and kind of what I have seen from this team, and also just the fact that you truly will have 5 guys on the floor save for Collins if he's on the floor, that are going to have the green light to shoot the three. I think that you will challenge the 3-point number at some point this season. At least you're, above 23s made. I think that that's a real possibility. And when something like that happens, it's the great equalizer. It doesn't really matter quite how good the other teams play. And if Alabama hits 23 threes, they're probably going to win the game, right? Like they're probably going to win the game, save for something absolutely insane happening. And I think that that's something you have to realize is, and you're absolutely right. Like, I don't think that Alabama is going to get run off the floor, right? Like, I think that they could be manhandled, but even if we're struggling to contain somebody's front court, I still have looked at it as if we're trading threes for twos, we're going to win that math battle, right? Like, and that's what Nate Oates kind of to a degree bases his offense on. Not exactly, because the free throws and other things that we've talked about at nauseum, but I think that is something that I am very curious to see what happens with this team, because I think that Bethea will add to that when he eventually gets healthy and is able to get on the floor. I know I saw some stuff where I think he's walking around without the scooter now. The earliest reports I had heard was end of November, beginning of December. My gut says after the MTE, but I don't, like I said, I haven't heard anything else. I'm not sure if you had, but that's kind of the last I had heard as far as Bethea. In my mind, if you can get him in, even in that stretch of playing a bunch of assistants, that's good to kind of get him tuned up before conference play if possible.
Yeah, Bethea's a key. He's a key guy that's gonna. I mean, he kind of controls our ceiling because he was supposed to be one of the top 3 or 4 best players on this team, and I still think talent-wise he is. From what I've seen, it's just gotta get. He sometimes gets a mental wall. He hits a mental wall to where It really affects him hitting his ceiling of his potential. And if he can get past that, Nate Oates has mentioned that a couple times at luncheons that I've gone to. Bethea is his worst enemy sometimes, his own worst enemy. So I think he's a key component to them hitting their ceiling.
Yeah, I've definitely heard some rumors of that as well, or some comments that Nate had made at luncheons that, some of Bethea's problem isn't his talent. It's sometimes his mind. He thinks, either too highly or too poorly of himself. And he kind of has his ebbs and flows goes sometimes with his game. And when he's riding the high, he's one of the best players in the country. And when he's not in the best mindset, it's, not always the best for him or his teammates. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Jordan. I want to give you time to kind of, let the people know where they can find you, make sure everybody knows all about your show that you have going on. So let people know where you're at.
Yeah, on Twitter at Harper Nation 24. I'm always updating things on there. I didn't go with the On3 Rivals merger, so I'm kind of doing things independently now. I appreciate guys like you, Owen, that let me still do something I love, and that's talk about Alabama basketball on whatever platform. You got a great thing going here, man. And I appreciate it. But yeah, tune into my Alabama basketball podcast I've had going for 7 years now, 7th year of the Double Dribble podcast on all podcast platforms. We'll start recording weekly now that the season is about to be upon us on Monday. Look for an episode on Sunday, and then once a week up until conference play, and then I'll be doing it twice a week. So go check out the podcast, subscribe. Subscribe to Owens as well. He does great work, basketball and football. So yeah, just support all these independent guys that do their thing supporting Alabama athletics.
I really appreciate it, Jordan. And yeah, as he mentioned, if y'all didn't hear that, y'all heard that right. He's been doing this 7 years. So Jordan is one of the OGs of Alabama basketball podcasts. I mean, as far as I'm aware, unless there's somebody I've never heard of, like, you're the one that's been doing it the longest in terms of Alabama basketball. So I really, really appreciate the work that you put in. And I listen to it. I drive from Tuscaloosa to Hoover for work. So I listen to podcasts pretty much every day. And so, I listen to it on the way to work. When you drop new episodes. So definitely, if you guys have not checked it out, I definitely would recommend you do so. Thank you so much, Jordan, for joining the show. I really do appreciate it. And everybody, we will catch you in the next episode. Peace.